The idea for story clubs grew out of a desire to help families find a way to grow a love for America and liberty in their homes, as well as bring families together with other like-minded families. You may well already be involved in some kind of co-op, and the ideas presented here could easily be adapted to fit in with whatever you're already doing. Here's more words from my notes. If this republic has future struggles before it and is to come out victorious in them all, we must see to it that the children of each generation know by heart the glorious history of their country. But how do we pull a generation away from the instant thrill of video games and iPhones and make it cool to read history? I'm confident that once they start hearing the stories, they'll look forward to more, but in the beginning we may need to offer a little more incentive to get them going, which is what the story clubs are about. The vision of story clubs is that you will invite a few families to gather with you once a month as families for a 1 to 2 hour story club meeting. If no one has a home large enough for all of you to meet, most communities have public libraries offer meeting rooms for free or for a very small charge. Or look to churches, community centers, or clubhouses that might offer space for you to meet. When the weather's warm, you can meet in a park. I envision several things happening at this meeting. First, it gives children an opportunity to pledge allegiance to the flag, learn to respect it, and see others doing the same. Not all schools teach this anymore. Second, it gives children an opportunity to learn our national anthems and songs at home and then join in singing them with others as opposed to just observing someone else performing them. I'm offering the stories behind the songs that you can share with them so that they can grow to love them even more. Third, story clubs provide a warm, encouraging environment for children to recite poems they are learning in front of a group. This builds confidence in speaking in front of a group. It's not as intimidating as giving a talk or a speech. In a moment, I'm going to talk about awarding points, and having the incentive to earn points may help a child memorize poetry that they might not have done otherwise. If you have a lot of children in your group, have each of them who has memorized a poem that month put their name in a basket and then draw out 1 or 2 to actually recite their poem. Let everyone who puts their name in the basket receive points for memorization, even though they may not all have a chance to recite it in front of the group that month. I'll include suggested poems each month, but you certainly aren't limited to those choices. Fourth, story clubs give families a chance to play games with other families. Each month I'll include a simple game for the group based on that month's reading. Playing games builds a sense of community and helps children develop a widening circle of friends of all ages. Games are great icebreakers. Invite grandparents along who live nearby to participate. Fifth, story clubs encourage interaction with other children and adults as they work on craft activities to take home and to serve as a reminder of the evening's meeting. Take pictures of them with their craft, and especially with their friends, to include in their notebooks. In time, the memory of friends will likely outweigh the memory of the actual craft, which I see as a good thing. Sixth, enjoy refreshments together as you socialize and pick up materials for the coming month's study and redeem points earned, which is the most important part of the meeting. The prizes offered through summer reading programs at public libraries have proven to be a great incentive to get reluctant readers to read. It is hoped that by offering an incentive to the children in your group to read, you'll accomplish the same thing. As a group, each month, decide on some kind of prize or reward for all children who have read during the month. You can vary it from month to month if you want. I suggest awarding 1 point for each minute that has been read. It's just not any reading, though. You're specifically enticing them to learn more about our country, so the reading should come from American history the first year, expanding to world history the second if you choose to continue on. The books in the online libraries and resource guide serve as a menu to choose from. Have them keep track of what they're reading in their reading logs. Prizes can be anything your group decides on, from prize stores with prizes from the dollar store or Oriental Trading Company to awarding everyone with a certain number of points with a roller skating party or a pizza party. Or one fun idea I ran across was to have an ice cream bar with multiple toppings. The more points they earn, the more toppings they get to pile on their ice cream. Or plan a live or a silent auction where kids can accumulate points over several months to use to bid on prices at the silent auction. You can even let the prizes be games, toys, or household items you no longer want, so it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. One man's trash is another man's treasure, after all. You can make it as simple or as elaborate as you want, although simple is more likely to happen. Do whatever you think will give the children in your group an incentive to read. Often just seeing peers engaged in the same activity is motivation enough. I've tried to provide as many resources for you that I can think of to make it easy to put together. Each month you'll find suggested songs, poems, activity pages to color, games, craft activities, and refreshment ideas. Of course, you're welcome to use these ideas any way you want, even if you don't join with other families. Most of the ideas will be fun to use with your own families. I've organized the resources for these story clubs around the Freedom Series and the World History Series, so I'd like to spend a little time giving you the background behind these two series and to take you a tour of the books so you know what's in them for your use. As I described before, there are 12 volumes of books in the Freedom Series, all taken from the golden age of children's literature before 1923. They provide an overall picture of our history from the days of early exploration through World War I. Each book has a selection that is story-based, plus some original source material to back up that story, such as journal and diary entries, personal letters, personal recollections, and quotes. Our Freedom Series have made their way into hundreds of homes, and I hear from mothers and fathers quite regularly who tell me how much their children are enjoying them. And that makes me happy. Most of them read them aloud to their children. But my hope is they will make their way into thousands of homes across the country for another reason. I've read enough history to understand that tyranny always lurks around freedom. There's always someone who wants to seize power and rule the lives of people. Always. And the time-tested way of winning over a people is to make them forget who they are. As Karl Marx said, a people without a heritage are easily persuaded. That process here in America is well underway. And as we move into the digital age where we trade hard copies of books for the convenience of online reads, I worry how easy it is to become for power-grabbing forces to control access to which stories we'll have access to. We already see it happening in countries around the world. I would just feel a lot better knowing that a basic understanding of our history, along with the principles that teach us how to remain free, are first safely and physically preserved in thousands of homes all across the nation, and then permanently planted in hearts. If a child cannot tell a story by heart, it's not there yet. Keep in mind, when a nation loses its way and its soul, although it's the poets who usually rekindle the flame, it's the storytellers who reset the course. We hear talk of revisionist history a lot by both sides of the political spectrum. Well, these stories are the originals, not the revisions. This is American history as it was taught to the children of our young republic. The stream is purest, nearest its source. We may discover errors in their understanding, but it still gives a proper baseline of study. As I studied these stories and tried to understand for myself the lessons within them, I realized the formula for staying free comes down to three things: faith, virtue, and patriotism, which are exactly the three elements that have gone missing from our modern history books for children. If you go to the Garden of Liberty page on our site, you'll see a free ebook where I talk about these three principles in greater depth. The Garden of Liberty page is also where you want to go in our website to find the resources you'll need for the story clubs. As the Freedom Series provides the core upon which the story clubs are based, I'd like to take you on a brief tour of the 12 volumes so you can start to get an idea of what's in them. But before I dive in, you may want to consider taking the month or two prior to starting your actual club meetings to kindle the fire by reading our American History Stories volume by Mara Pratt. It's a great family read aloud. These books were written around 1898 and have been very popular among homeschoolers for years. We've combined all 4 volumes into one book. These are short, simple, but very interesting stories that will paint a general picture of America's history and spark an interest to learn more. This volume is not actually part of the Freedom Series and is sold separately, but will give you something to start with immediately while you're organizing your group. The first book in our Freedom Series is Stories of Christopher Columbus. Few of our heroes have fallen as quickly and as thoroughly as this courageous and determined soul who opened up the knowledge of a new world at precisely the right time that freedom needed a home. It's popular to dwell on all the things Columbus did wrong, but heroes are never heroes because they're perfect. All heroes are flawed. What makes them stand above the rest of us is their willingness to risk and dare and to do the extraordinary, and we are the beneficiaries of their daring. The age of exploration is full of exciting and heartbreaking stories that especially appeal to children entering the heroic years. The first book is a wonderful introduction to Columbus's story. It doesn't overlook his flaws, but neither does it dwell on them. The second book that is included in this volume is full of the actual writings of Columbus from his diaries and journals that will appeal to the more mature reader and will help them form opinions based on original source accounts. The online library offers stories of other explorers of this age as well. I starred the books that I think will most likely appeal to a young reader. Next, we have stories of the Pilgrims. This is the first year I've heard the Pilgrims under attack. They're being called America's first terrorists. Please let your children know the truth about them. There are 3 books in this volume. The first book was written by a foremost scholar of the Pilgrims who wanted to put what he knew in story form to appeal to children. You can trust the accuracy of his retelling. I chose the second book because it adds narrative detail to the story and brings additional details to light. Finally, I included sections from William Bradford's own diary so that children can read the account from the original source. Almost everything we know about the Pilgrims came from Bradford's diary. It's a national treasure. I think the biggest realization for me was to learn how young the Pilgrims were. Most of them were young families with parents in their 20s. Of the 102 passengers, about a third of them were children. After that first horrible and tragic winter, almost all the children survived, but only 4 women were left to take care of them. It's a story even little children can relate to. The online library offers additional books about the Pilgrims, but also stories of the settling of the colonies in the 1600s. It will soon become apparent how important religious freedom was to so many of America's first settlers. The third volume, Stories of Early American History, acts as a review of events of the first 200 years, including colonizing the 13 colonies, and then starts to lay out the events and causes of why we needed to declare our independence from England in the 1700s. The first book is the imaginary story time of a beloved aunt who tells the history of America to her eager nieces and nephews. I like the way she links events together and brings the stories to life. It's a comparatively long book, so you may not get through the whole thing on the first rotation. Much of the back end of this first book describes events of the Revolutionary War, so you might hold off reading that part until you come back to it the next year. The second book is the actual diary of the wife of an officer in the colonial army and gives you a fascinating sense of life during the conflict. It also gives the interesting perspective of who the so-called enemy is, as she shares the story of the life of a wounded British officer she cares for in the middle of the war. The online library also offers additional readings on the French settlement in the Americas during the 1700s and the French and Indian Wars. Month 4 focuses on one man, George Washington. Every great nation has had an epic or legendary hero who embodies the nation's ideal. I see Washington trying to emerge as that hero, but we keep knocking him off his pedestal. We have historians trying to tell us he was a bumbling general, or that he swore or played cards or liked the ladies. But in doing so, they unwisely dismantle the one man capable of lifting our nation up. He was the father of our country. He embodies the national ideal of always telling the truth, of relinquishing power, of the common man rising to do his duty, of the courage that comes only from faith in divine providence when faced by overwhelming odds. He spoke more powerfully by his silence than by his words. He shows the world the great influence one man of virtue has. So I think it's worth coming back to him every single year to learn from the example of his life. The first book in this volume introduces children to George Washington. It will help them care about him. They'll feel like they know him. The second book is a book that's dismissed by scholars today because it has a story about a little boy, a hatchet, and a cherry tree. It's all made up, they tell us. It never really happened. And it's true, the story may not be true, but it is truth. If you should chop down your father's cherry tree, you should say, I cannot tell a lie. In fact, a traveling Frenchman later in the 1800s said, you know why you Americans are the most honest people in the world today? It's because you were raised on the story of a boy and his hatchet. This book is full of a lot of truths that just may not be true. But it's a book of tremendous importance because this is what the children of our young republic were reading. It was the #1 bestseller in its day. It first appeared in the early 1800s, and this was the message it carried. And remember, moreover, my countrymen, that you are now the favored actors on a most conspicuous theater. You are certainly responsible for the highest trust ever confided to any people. The eyes of long oppressed humanity are now looking up to you as to her last hope. The whole world are anxious spectators of your trial, and with your behavior at this crisis, not only your own, but the destiny of unborn millions is involved. Yes, the book is full of flowery language and over-the-top hero worship. You may find it difficult to read, but as you read this book, keep in mind, this is the very same book that a young Lincoln in the backwoods of Kentucky read and reread, and later said it was one of the most influential books of his life. It carries a message of union and unity, which became the focus of Lincoln's quest to hold the Union together, and it's filled with wisdom that will shed light on some of the problems we're facing today. I love this book. I also included at the end of the Washington volume a few personal recollections of Washington given by his adopted son, George Washington Parke Custis. The online library will give you years' worth of study of Washington's life and ideals. Month 5 now offers the story of Lafayette and the story of 2 revolutions. Lafayette was the young Frenchman who came to fight for our liberty with such courage and devotion that it was said that America would never forget him. Yet I'm afraid we have. Few know his story. My daughter's husband is an officer in the military, and when she finished this book, she said she wished every officer in the military would read it. It's a favorite. I chose to devote a whole month to him because his was the story of 2 revolutions. He hoped to bring home to France what he saw in America, but it didn't work out that way because you can't give liberty to a people. They have to understand its cost and want it themselves. That's a vital lesson to begin to instill in the hearts of children. This is the month given to study the stories of the American Revolution, and you'll find books filled with stories from the participants and the heroes that emerged. You'll also find books that compare the American Revolution with the French Revolution, and in the spirit of trying to include original sources in each volume, I included the letters Lafayette wrote home to his wife during his time in America to give a sense of what he was feeling and to gain a deeper appreciation of the level of personal sacrifice our heroes endured. Month 6 is devoted to learning about our government and especially gain an appreciation for and understanding of our Constitution. The first book included in the volume of Stories of the Government is an imaginary trip to Washington, D.C. made by an uncle with his nieces and nephews. As they tour the sites, he explains the stories behind each landmark and institution. Next comes the story of the Constitution with a unique perspective of England's side of the conflict. It highlights the problems with the Articles of Confederation and the danger period before our Constitution was written, and also how difficult it was for these founders to come to a common agreement of what our original Constitution should be. It truly was a miracle. Then I've included a little book that first helps children understand why we need laws to maintain our freedom, the idea of liberty in law. It touches on the different forms of government that have existed through world history, and then explains the Constitution line by line in a way children can understand, and doesn't shy away from declaring why it is the best form of government. Finally, I included thoughts from the founders themselves on government and the nature of freedom. When was the last time you read an introduction like this in our history books? And now, my young friends, we desire to impress upon you this solemn truth. The good or evil of this model country is in your hands. Only a few years must pass before all who are now occupying the positions of trust and honor will be no more, and you are to fill their places. The boys of today are to be the men of 20 years hence. Are you going to be ready? Will you see to it that only honest, upright men are placed in office? If so, you will hold the Union where you find it, the best government in the world. If you're looking for patriotic poetry and national songs, the online library for this month is where you'll want to turn. You'll also find classics like Bastiat's The Law, the Federalist Papers, Tocqueville's Democracy in America, and helps to learn more about the Constitution. Furthermore, you'll find a number of books specifically written to help children understand the nature of freedom and its struggle to survive throughout history. For your more mature readers, I highly recommend Rose Wilder Lane's Discovery of Freedom. Rose is the daughter of Laura Ingalls Wilder of Little House on the Prairie fame. Rose thought communist and socialist ideas made sense until she saw it up close and personal in the countries governed by its principles and came back to America as a voice for liberty. She offers many thought-provoking ideas. You'll also find stories behind historic landmarks and stories to help understand the War of 1812 in this month's online library. Month 7 is devoted to stories of the American frontier, primarily during the westward expansion of the 1800s. I included a number of first-hand accounts in the American Frontier volume of stories that will bring the dangers and risks to life and will help your children appreciate the courage of their pioneer forefathers. I also included a number of stories of Native Americans to help create a respect for their culture. There were bad guys and good guys on both sides. The stories prove over and over again that only respect and fairness make it possible for us to get along. You'll find additional books in the online library that I believe you'll find fascinating. Your older children will likely enjoy The Soul of an Indian that gives insights into lesser-known beliefs and culture. Also, the online library provides some wonderful reads about Texas history stories, including the Alamo, the California missions, and the story of Hawaii. You can't get more Western frontier than that. Month 8 introduces children to America's other great hero, Abraham Lincoln. His life also offers endless inspiration of great wisdom. The first book is an introduction to his life. The second book, although still written with children in mind, begins to portray the rising of the great conflicts, not only pertaining to slavery, but states' rights versus federal rights. The third section gives more personal insights into Lincoln's character by those who knew him, and finally I've included many of Lincoln's own words. Civil rights continues to be one of the great challenges of our day, so spending time learning the stories of African Americans is important for instilling understanding and appreciation in the hearts of our children. The online library for this month mostly pertains to Lincoln, but in the Great Lives series, I have devoted an entire book and section to the lives of great African Americans. Slavery is truly one of the black marks on our history. The important lesson for our children to learn is that we corrected it, although we're still feeling the consequences of our mistakes. Month 9, Stories of Grant and Lee, is devoted to learning about the Civil War. In the book, children will become acquainted with the two great generals on opposing sides. This was not a war of the good guys against the bad guys. You'll find heroes and noble acts on both sides of the conflict, as well as cruelty. In the end, as brutal as the conflict was, America emerged stronger and more united as a nation. The first book about Ulysses S. Grant will introduce you to this humble giant, although he's not without his weaknesses. His life provides many examples worth emulating. I've included a few chapters from his memoirs, which older children may enjoy spending more time with, as well as personal recollections of people who knew him. After a brief introduction to the life of Robert E. Lee and personal recollections of those who knew him, I've included letters written by him, mostly to his family members during the Great War, that will give better insight into his heart and character. The online library also offers many stories from the Civil War itself and its heroes, both sung and unsung. Also, you'll find books to introduce the problems of the Reconstruction period. And now, month 10 brings us to the First World War. The first book brings the conflict down to the understanding of a child. Then they'll be introduced to the lives of the major generals who led the Allied forces. They'll see the war through the eyes of a few of its participants as well. Helping children understand the difference between a spirit of nationalism and a spirit of patriotism is an important topic of discussion this month. The online library has many additional books to choose from where older children can gain a greater understanding of the conflicts of the day, which will help them make sense of World War II and later studies. It's interesting to me that the time just prior to the war was a time that produced some of the most enduring and endearing children's books that have ever been written. These were the years of Anne of Green Gables, Pollyanna, Little Women, Understood Betsy, books that portrayed happiness in simple things and in home and family. Yet during this same time, America also saw horrible injustices, such as the plight of many of the new immigrants and corruption in government, which older children will read about. There's quite a contrast. You won't find anything later than 1923 in the Forgotten Classics Library because that is the cutoff year for public domain. When I considered the books for months 11 and 12, I assumed families would most likely take a bit of a break in the summer months. So these 2 months are for review and preview. It doesn't really matter when they happen in the rotation. You'll notice with all these books there's a lot of overlap in review by design. Month 11 offers a chance to step back and take in the whole of America's story with a narrative flow. Once a year, I recommend choosing a book that gives an overall sweep of our history to connect events and put people in their proper place. It serves as a review if they've been through all 10 months, and serves as a review and a preview of events to come if they're somewhere in the middle of the readings. You'll find multiple choices in the online library to accommodate a wide range of learning comprehension levels. Finally, month 12 gives children a chance to read about individual people in greater depth. Stories of Great Americans gives you a collection of shorter stories that work great for read-alouds, and the online library gives you many full biographies to learn more about favorites. In the book, the stories are arranged in a chronological order, but if you're looking specifically for stories to appeal to younger children, start with the ones within the larger font. On the Story Club monthly resource pages, I suggest which pages to read a first time through the rotation. As you come back through the rotation a second time, encourage children to continue to read from the online libraries in the Freedom Series, but now you can start introducing the stories of other countries. As I've said before, to truly appreciate America, a child needs perspective that comes from learning the struggle between tyranny and oppression in every country. We tend to be anxious to teach the mechanics of the Constitution, but that won't make them love it. Only when they see how rare it is, the price that was paid for it, and what life looks like without freedom will they fight to save it. A study of the story of all the nations helps towards that end. So if you choose to continue on with the second year of Story Club meetings, pick a country a month to study. I've linked them to the study of the Freedom Series as I discussed in the Story Resource Guide. Just like I did for the Freedom Series, you'll find Pinterest pages with ideas for cultural crafts and foods. Continue to offer incentives to read. In the World History online libraries, let me call attention to a couple of series of books. For little children, you may want to look for Our Little Cousins series and the Twin series. The G.A. Henty books were and are still extremely popular historical fiction works that will bring many historical events to life. For your older, more seasoned readers, they'll find a lot of interesting stories in Charles Morris's Historical Tales and Eva March Tappan's The World Story and Art, Story and Song. You'll notice Story of the Nations in almost every world history library. These were the most popular history books at the turn of the 20th century. They were written specifically for young people by some of the foremost history scholars of the day. I say young people, but I suspect many of our college kids will find them a bit over their heads. But if you've prepared your children well, they will gain great understanding from these books. Will Durant's Story of Civilization is also highly recommended for older students. I linked the ones I could find in public domain. If you shop library sales, you often can find a set of them. They're a worthy addition to your home library. These are only suggestions. I hope, again, that you'll share ideas on our Facebook pages of ideas that have worked for you. As I record this, I don't have everything up yet for the story clubs. I've only got pieces posted, but if you plan on starting, I'll be working through the Freedom Series first, and then the World History, and we'll be able to keep ahead of you.